Greetings. Today I would like to talk about Jesus and especially the healing of Jesus. And in the New Testament, there are many histories about when Jesus went around healing people. He was healing a lame man. He was healing a blind man. He was also raising up people from the dead. And in one story, there is a woman who is just touching him and she gets healed. And there are 4 Gospels in the New Testament, and 2 of these Gospels are talking about a special event that was taking place, and that was when Jesus was healing the centurion's servant. Those 2 are Matthew 8, 5 to 13, and Luke 7, 1 to 10. And these 2 Gospels, they differ a bit. So we will briefly look into what is it that they differ about and why. So I will read from Matthew. So Matthew 8, 5 to 13. If you have your Bibles with you, just open them up there. And I'm reading from the New Testament for everyone. So Jesus went into Capernaum. A centurion came up and pleaded with him. "Master," he said, "my servant is lying at home, paralyzed. He is in a very bad state." "I'll come and make him better," said Jesus. "Master," replied the centurion, "I don't deserve to have you to come under my roof. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. I know what authority is about. You know, I've got soldiers answering to me, and I can say to one of them, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another one, 'Come here,' and he comes. And I can say, 'Do this to my slave,' and he does it." Jesus was fair amazed when he heard this. "I'm telling you the truth," he said to the people who are following. "I haven't found faith like this, not even in Israel. Let me tell you this. Lots of people will come from east and west and join the great party of celebration with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness, where people will weep and gnash their teeth." Then he turned to the centurion. "Go home," he said. "Let it be as you believed." And his servant was healed at that very moment. So now we turn to Luke and Luke 7, 1 to 10. When Jesus had finished saying all these words in the hearing of the people, he went into Capernaum. There was a centurion who had a slave who was particularly precious to him. This slave was ill at the point of death. The centurion heard about Jesus and sent some Jewish elders to him to ask him to come and rescue his slave. They approached Jesus and begged him eagerly. "He deserves a favor like this from you," they said. "He loves our people, and he himself built us a synagogue." Jesus went with them. When he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him with a further message. "Master," he said, "don't trouble yourself. I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. That's why I didn't think myself worthy to come to you in person. But just say the word, and my slave will be healed. You see, I'm used to living under authority, and I have soldiers reporting to me. I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes. To another one, 'Come,' and he comes. And to my slave, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was astonished. "Let it tell you," he said, turning to the crowd that was following him, "I haven't found faith of this kind, even in Israel." The people who had been sent to him went back to the house. There they found the slave in good health. So we might ask ourselves, what are the thoughts about this story? And why do Mark and Luke differ? as they are doing. I'm not sure, of course, but one thing could be their different upbringings, their backgrounds, and even their culture. Matthew, he was one of the 12 disciples. He was following Jesus, and also he was one of the witnesses of the ascension of Jesus. He was a former tax collector, one of the most criticized profession in ancient Judah, despised by many. Matthew is also named Levi, and that by Luke, and that could indicate that he was from the tribe of Levi, a Greek name that he went by. Matthew, he was a Jew. Traditional or not so traditional, some argue, but the way the Gospel of Matthew is written, it indicates that he knew a lot about the Jewish laws and customs. But also, the Gospel of Matthew is linked to Matthew's profession. For example, the Gospel of Matthew talks about money in a more detail and greater frequency than all the other Gospels. There we go. Then we have Luke. Luke, he wasn't an eyewitness to Jesus' ministry. Luke was not one of the original disciples, but he was a close friend to Paul. He lived during the first century, and according to his own writings, he carefully investigated everything from the beginning. Paul mentions Luke in passing in Colossians 4:14, and from that mention, we learn that Luke was a doctor, and it reads, "Our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas send greetings." I have always heard and read that Luke was a Gentile, but recently, while searching for the different styles of writing, I have read that many people argue that Luke was a Gentile, which would, if so, make him the only Gentile author in the New Testament. Luke likely was from Troas or Antioch, but that doesn't mean that he couldn't have been a Jew. It's entirely possible that Luke was a Hellenic Jew, biological Jewish, but culturally Greek. Hellenic Jews adopted the custom of Greek culture and didn't follow all the Jewish practices, such as circumcision. But clear here is that Luke is writing to a Gentile audience. Luke is also using the Greek word doulos, meaning bond slave, someone born into slavery. Matthew, however, he uses the word pias, meaning a child or a young person. The context indicates that this servant was not a little boy, but a young man still in his teens. Matthew, in verse 11, includes Jesus' comment about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob eating with Gentiles in the kingdom. Luke leaves this out because he's writing to a Gentile audience, yet another proof of their different culture, approach, and agenda. In verse 9, we also read that Jesus says that he is astonished. And when we meet Jesus are meeting us day by day, even during this strange time of the pandemic. And when we have this encounter, we all are, I hope, astonished to see his miracles and his love that he has for all of us. Israel during this time was under Roman rule, and centurions had a command of 100 soldiers and were a common sight in most of the larger towns in Israel. The job of the soldiers was primarily to maintain order for the empire, but they were also involved in some of the local infrastructure projects. And one thing the soldiers did, for example, was to build synagogues for the Jewish people. You would think then that building synagogues would gain the soldiers a little favor, but the Jewish people only saw them as ruthless, evil oppressors who worshipped idols and harassed innocent people. They openly hated the Romans, and a lot of that hate was justified. In Jesus' day, tax collectors, prostitutes, Samaritans, and the Roman occupation were four groups prone to being considered purely wicked by the Jews. Yet, here is one of the major shockers found in the Gospels. Jesus intentionally hang out with people from these four despised groups. Jesus refused to identify any person, group, nation, or cause as entirely evil. That's why he is following with the group to heal the man's servant. But this servant was different in many ways, and he was very anxious to get help for his servant. The centurion's character reveals that he not only thought of his servant as valuable, but also that he was concerned for his well-being as a key member of his household. The servant, or slave, is laying at home paralyzed, sick, ready to die, paralyzed in pain and danger. And I'm not a doctor, but the word paralyzed, when it comes to sickness, signals to me that he was very ill. It can be a lot of things that he could suffer from, and it could well have been a snake bite. Nobody really knows. The centurion wants to get help, and he approached Jesus. And here is another key thing. To know who Jesus is and what he can do, the centurion heard about Jesus. He has heard a lot about him. Jesus went around healing people and was in many ways a rather controversial person. So Jesus was rather famous and well known, but they did not have internet, radio, TV, etc. during Jesus' days. But someone has told the centurion or someone around him the news about Jesus. And it is so important that we speak openly, boldly about Jesus all the time so people can hear about the gospel, the good news. If we do not tell people, who else will? Will our schools educate our children about Jesus? Will our politicians do it? I've heard many times Swedes asking questions about Christianity and the Bible, but they are not asking the right persons, and the answer they get is often wrong. I got a question one time from a friend of mine who heard from someone else about things that are clearly not in the Bible, so we have to be aware. And one thing, and perhaps the best way to build a bridge to someone who does not have a relationship with Christ, is through our personal testimony, like how you came to Christ, why, how. And the great thing is also that it does not matter if you are young in your faith, you still have a story to tell. And in this story, there's also great testimony. The centurion believes in Jesus' power. He approaches Jesus through the Jews, and that was a proper way for a Gentile to do. And here is a Gentile who really understands and recognizes Jesus for who he is. He was also a very generous man, and he had built a synagogue so that he could worship the one true God together with the Jews. He could not enter the temple since he was a Gentile, though. The centurion, a man of authority, and he says so himself, and he's placing himself under the authority of Jesus. He feels he is not worthy. Again, we see the godliness of this man. He was very humble. And when leaders possess authority, their words carry weight. The centurion's earthly position, that he is well respected. We read that in Luke 7:45. And in spite of his resources, he understood that it meant very little in the eyes of the Lord, who had been given all the authority in heaven and on earth. And we hide ourselves behind our titles and wealth. we think highly of ourselves. We think we have all the answers to the huge problem on earth. But he also recognizes his own limitations. And I wonder, do we do that? You see, wise people, they do this. And we should come to Jesus with open arms and confessing our weaknesses. Authority comes from above. That is why we say that we are under someone's authority. The centurion understood being under authority. In coming to Jesus, the centurion was appealing to a higher authority. All authority is linked to obedience. You cannot have this until you get under the authority that is over you. We might resist being under the authority, but God, he does not give kingdom authority to rebels. When the Lord gives you authority, he gives you spiritual authority. And we read in Luke 10:18-19, which reads, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. He replied, look, I've given you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions and over every power of the enemy. Nothing will ever be able to harm you. So again, the centurion understood the strength of authority. He surrendered to someone else's authority. And strength for the Christian lives comes from surrender. Our spiritual strengths come because we are surrendered to Jesus Christ. And authority differs from power. Authority comes from the office. Power resides in the person. And I was once given an analogy of power and authority, and I thought it was quite fun. And it is like this. An American football player, they are very big, they are fierce, and they have a lot of power. But the only man on the football field without a so-called uniform or any pads, he's only armed with a whistle. He, the little guy, has the authority. He can stop a game and send guys to the locker room. Jesus says that we are the little guy. I give you authority over all the power of the enemy. Our strengths come from his authority. And it is time for all of us to tell the enemy to take a hike. Jesus himself had authority. We read that in Matthew 7:24-29. When Jesus was teaching, he had authority like a king or an empire. The centurion also had great faith. He totally believes that Jesus did not have to come in person to lay hands on the servant to get healed, which was very unusual during this time. When we look at the Old Testament, all the prophets, like Elijah, must be there in person. He knew the word of Christ, and he believed Christ's word before he saw the works. Jesus is amazed at the man's faith. And it's not very often in the scripture that we can read that Jesus is amazed. Jesus says he does not need to see the signs. This Gentile really does understand a lot, believes it, and acts on it. The centurion saw that when Jesus spoke, God spoke. A thing to remember here is that never once did Jesus commend his disciple for their great faith. When Jesus was crucified and laid in the grave, the disciples gathered and talked. And Thomas said, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my fingers into the nail marks, and put my hand into the side, I'm going to believe. A week later, Jesus appeared before them, and Jesus is asking Thomas, is it because you've seen me that you believed? God blessing on people who did not see and yet believe. So the faith in this centurion is rather strong. I love a lot of stories, and there are two stories that I would like to share with you, and they are both linked to great faith. The first one is a private soldier, Desmond Doss. He walked into the bloodiest battle of World War II's Pacific history, and with nothing to protect himself than his Bible and his faith in Jesus Christ. Doss had enlisted as a medic, and he was refusing to carry a rifle. This fighting took place in April 1945. The battlefield, located at the top of a sheer 400-foot cliff, was fortified with deadly network of Japanese machine gun nests and booby traps. So facing heavy machine gun and a lot of bomb fire, Doss repeatedly ran alone into the kill zone, carrying wounded soldiers to the edge of the cliff and single-handedly lowered them down to safety. Each time he saved a man's life, he prayed out loud, "Lord, please help me to get one more." By the end of the night, he had rescued around 75 men, including some Japanese soldiers. And the amazing thing about this is that Doss did this over and over again during his time in the war. And it's so amazing that when the actor Mel Gibson was making a film on this story, thought to himself that this is so amazing that people will probably not believe this as a true story. Doss had a strong faith, and his faith in God saved not only all the men that he cared for, but also himself. The other story is about Mrs. Gilbridge, and she was the oldest of 4 children born to a farm family living in a small village in eastern Poland. She was only 5 when the World War II broke out. Her parents, they were hiding people in a shed on their farm, and she would bring them food. She would learn after the war that the people that they were hiding were Jews, and hiding them was punishable by death. In 1943, Ukrainians, allied with Nazis, were terrorizing the region, killing Polish families in their homes at night. And that summer, her family and the neighbors slept in the fields for safety. In August, her father was fed up, and he was insisting that they should return to their own beds. But it turned out that that very night, their village was invaded by the Ukrainians. The family fled in their nightclothes, but met scenes of terror whichever way they turned. Their village was being burned from both ends, and you couldn't tell the cries of the animals from the people. And she said it was chaos, totally chaos. They were then captured and forced to work in a work camp for 12-hour shifts. It was, of course, cold, hard, not so much food. And they lived in constant fear that this day could be the last. Her mother was later sent to a concentration camp after having written a letter criticizing the living conditions. Her mother was suspected of being into the Polish underground and was sent to Ravensbrück, where she was sterilized. Her mother, after the war, returning to Poland, now communist-led, she begins her search. In 1948, she finds her family living at peace in America, and in desperation finds a very dangerous way to get there. She joins a secret underground organization in hopes of escaping to Sweden and from there travel to America. but it would not be that simple. She is caught by the border patrol and is imprisoned. It will be years until the family is united. Mrs. Gilbridge said that she's telling this story because she wants today's students to realize that 11 million people, including 6 million Jews, died in the Holocaust. Even in this horrible situation, I never lost my faith in God. Jews, Catholics, Roma people, homosexuals, the handicapped, they were all considered undesirable people by the Nazi regime. I still have nightmares every week, she says, and that is what hate does. If you want peace on earth for your generation, you see, my generation did not do so well. So if you want peace, act peacefully. If you want respect, be the first to give it, and maybe you have a better world than mine was. There are, of course, a lot of other people who have great faith, and a lot of them are in the Bible. We see Abraham, who left everything behind and went to a place God had told him to go, and even obeying God when he wanted Abraham to proceed with the hardest task in his life. We have Esther, who, without not knowing the outcome, went to the king without being asked for, risking her life but saving all the Jews. Noah, when God told about sending rain, there were no black clouds or hints of rain. Noah could have turned down Lord's word for that matter, but he did not. He believed in him and started doing the work that he gave him to do, building the ark. He had trust in God and worked in his path. There are others, of course, and you might have other names to put here, but we have like Gideon, Rahab, and of course David, fighting Goliath, and so on. To gain faith, there are some important steps, and that is, of course, to know who Christ is. And we have to know him completely. We have to believe in him, trust in him, accepting him. And we have to try to live as him. In order to do that, we have to read our Bibles. The first thing and the most important thing is the way to build faith is to read the Bible with an open mind, because God speaks to us through the different Bible verses. And to pray. Daily prayers are a must because they help us to build a connection with God. But also spend time with other believers, as iron sharpens iron, listening to other people, rejoice when in their victories, mourn with them when they do so, and try to find common ground so that you can lift your brothers and sisters with the help of God to higher ground. The centurion was a great example for the Israelites that day. And imagine the legacy of faith that you can leave for someone today. Imagine lives forever changed, especially your own. So we have to trust, believe, have faith, because the Lord our God is able. Amen. Thank you for listening.